Hello everybody, Jesse back here with another episode of the ShuffleBus. And we're getting back to a little bit of content that is not focused on just purely tournament coverage. Although this is a deck that I am currently playing in ShuffleBus Season 3, which is a constructed tournament league through Discord, traditionally being played through Ashteki or TS. So it's a fixed deck format, which means that I have to pick a deck and play that deck all the way through a given season with no adjustments made to the deck whatsoever. As of the time of this recording, I have made top 8 with this deck out of 28 competitors. I finished the Swiss rounds at 3-2. My 2 losses we'll talk about a little bit when we discuss matchups and first fives, but I want to jump right into the deck itself and not waste a ton of time. So let's jump over, let's take a look, and because we've got all the cards now, I felt like it was more appropriate to lay the cards out on a table, on a plain surface, versus just going over to Ash's Live and discussing the cards that way. So let's jump over to the table, let's take a look at it, and let's see what we can teach you about my list. All right, welcome. So as you can see, laid out right in front of you here is my Pheonixborn that I played for this event. I was the only Odette in season. I just think that Odette is probably one of the best, if not the best, Pheonixborn in the game. I may be a little biased on that, but I think that other players would agree with me as well. And I just want to take a few moments to talk about why that is. It really comes down to Odette's on-card ability, Enter the Fray. Enter the Fray says main action, cost, and exhaust, deal 2 damage to a target unit. And then, but not then, it just says then deal damage to this Pheonixborn equal to that target unit's attack value. So what this is a built-in free, no dice cost, just tempo cost in terms of a main action removal spell. 2 damage isn't enough to take out a lot of really big units and things like that, but it's really good at enabling kills on Frostback Bear. Even though it won't kill Frostback Bear directly, we'll get into how you can support killing 3 life units with Odette's Enter the Fray ability. And anything under 3 life is just dead to Enter the Fray. So great for countering first round 3-eyed owls, which is a very common first round play for in a competitive space, because 3-eyed owl takes away that first 5 advantage and turns it into a first 4. There's other O2s that become prominent in tournament play, such as Gilder. So Enter the Fray allows you to open up that battlefield a little bit and take away possibly your opponent's unit guard. And those are, since they're O2s, they literally do no damage to Odette when those things happen. But in my tournament particularly, I use Enter the Fray a lot to deal with things like Frostback Bear and to create favorable trades. So what I mean by that is, in my top 8 match, like my opponent's playing Frostback Bear as well. And so my intent is, if I enter the fray, their Frostback Bear, and then they attack me with their Frostback Bear, which sort of forces the Frostback Bear to attack, because I can enter the fray and natural ping, where we'll get into the dice that I'm using here in just a second, or I can enter the fray and do nothing else to that bear but threaten it with 1 life remaining. And so with 1 life remaining, my opponent is sort of forced at that point to main action attack with Frostback Bear. And if I have my own Frostback Bear in play, then I'm able to kill their Frostback Bear just through a guard of my Pheonixborn, and in turn return, kill that bear in return while my bear survives. So it just gives me a little bit of board advantage. It's not a ton, and it's not going to win you the game outright, but Ashes is such a game of incremental advantage that these are the kinds of trades you want to make. They're favorable on dice, favorable on cards. The thing that I think is important to note here is that this Odette list is, at its core, a control deck. It's not intended to create big wide battlefields. It's not intended to create big terrifying monsters that bypass. It has those things in it. But those things are there after the corner has been turned just to win the game. It's built on two kind of key principles. Principle one is always be taking care of your opponent's battlefield. Create board advantage, where you have more units in play of meaning than they do. Number two is, if you can't do that, stall your battlefield and pivot to a burn strategy. So we'll get into that. And then it comes down to how I built and chose my dice. So because of the burn strategy, the idea being that I might have to pivot to some other method of winning the game that doesn't involve attacking with units because I can't create incremental board advantage, then my options are to take the nature suite here. And in nature, I'm taking 5 nature dice. So these 5 nature dice are going to handle all of my burn, and they're going to create the bulk of my powerful units. By playing nature, we access Frostback Bear, access Hammer Knights, we access so many good cards. And you'll see as we lay the deck out that those things are all here because of that. So I then add 2 divine dice because divine and nature offer some unique up card synergies, and there are some extra value out of divine in particular, but I'm not deep in divine, which is why I just have 2 dice here. We have a single charm die. We'll get to what that is for here in just a minute. And then we're running 2 ceremonial dice. The ceremonial dice are primarily aimed at playing our knight package. So because Odette only has a battlefield of 5, we're not going to be able to put a bunch of little small units on the battlefield that don't have impact. They can't, right? Like if we put 2 1s in play, or we put 0-2s in play, and we do a lot of those, we end up in a situation where we have nothing meaningful to do with our battlefield, and our opponent just lets it stay clogged. So unless then you're going to clear your own battlefield with something like Meteor or Nature's Wrath or something of that style, you're not really able to free up battlefield space to do meaningful things. So we really want to make sure that every unit that we put into play has an impact on the game in a meaningful way. Allies. I'm going to leave Odette up here as well, so you all know who we're dealing with. We have not very many allies in this deck. Again, small battlefield, doesn't make a lot of sense for us to build a huge ally pool, because then we're just going to end up with hands clogged with allies that we can't do anything with. And that can be particularly problematic. So as mentioned earlier when we were making nature, we just go ahead and play a 2 of Hammer Knight. Now Hammer Knight is ceremonial power, nature class, and a basic. And it is a 3/4 knight, has alert. This is really, really important for opponents that are like wide weenie strategies. So if you're seeing Fallen, if you're seeing, those kinds of things, Mist Spirits, anything that's kind of big and wide, not necessarily big like strong, but wide where you've got, 6 or 7 or 8 units on the field. Hammer Knight's good because it allows you to block some of those units, and if you can do it advantageously, then you're set up in a way where you never exhausted your Hammer Knight. You still have use out of the Hammer Knight as you move forward. It also has Aftershock 1, so one of the benefits of Hammer Knight with this Aftershock ability against weenie decks is the ability to 2-for-1 your opponent. So you can take your Hammer Knight, attack it into something. They either take the Phoenixborn block and take 3 to the face, which is good for us, or they let the Hammer Knight eat up this thing, whatever it is, up to a 3 life unit, and Aftershock a 1 life unit. This is really good for dealing with Salamander Monk, which is really common in the meta. It's good for Three-Eyed Owl again. It's good for Gilder again. There's just a lot of units that Hammer Knight fights very advantageously. And I think if you're playing Nature and Ceremonial and not playing Hammer Knight, you're probably making a pretty big mistake in your deck build. The next one is a little less obvious of an inclusion, but it's perfect as a control card, and that is the Grave Knight. So I'm going to run a 2 of Grave Knight. Now, Grave Knight has the downside of 3 life, and as I mentioned earlier, 3 life is a liability, especially with Odette and against Aerodel. Aerodel is a very powerful Phoenixborn that can deal with 3 life units very effectively. And so I think you have a hard time playing Grave Knight into Aerodel because of the Water Blast and just, pick your poison of 1 damage main actions. Anchornaut, Gilder, I mean, there's a billion of them. So just know that, like, Grave Knight is potentially not a great card against Aerodel and Odette. But I mean, I think if your opponent is Odetting Grave Knight and you're getting 4 damage to the face, it's a pretty reasonable trade. So it's really just Aerodel that's the big problem for Grave Knight. What I love about Grave Knight is it deals with certain styles of decks that are very, very difficult to deal with otherwise. And the first one that comes to mind in my mind is snakes. Because Pheonix and her snakes always run 3x Golden Veil. One of the downsides of Golden Veil is that takes away a whole removal package, right? You have a hard time sort of pressuring Pheonix down with removal because she's got 3x Golden Veils to your removal. So the reality is like you're kind of on equal opportunity cost. Even if you overload your deck with removal, you're still in a similar position where the number of cards that can be played before the game is over is about the same. And so it's just going to be, did you draw a few more removal pieces than they did Golden Veils? And if not, then Pheonix probably wins that game. Well, Grave Knight fixes all of that, right? Because what your opponent doesn't want to do is spend Golden Veils on their Gilders or spend Golden Veils on, their other units or allies in the deck, because they're saving those Golden Veils for that snake that's going to inevitably get large enough to kill you in 1, 2, or 3 attacks. Okay, so with that in mind, when we play a Grave Knight into Pheonix, if we do it correctly and we clear the board so that all that's left is snake, and we play Grave Knight into snake, or we beat the snake to the battlefield, then we end up in a position where Grave Knight forces the snake to block, and Grave Knight is able to kill the snake. And you'll see that happen if you go back and look at the YouTube channel for ShuffleBus Season 3, I believe it's round 2, I play Carl, and Carl is playing an iteration of his Pheonix snake deck that won Season 1. And I just play Grave Knight with another card right away in round 1 and use it to very distinct advantage. And I still make a play mistake in that round 1, but I'm able to take away all of his round 1 tempo by using Grave Knight and Grave Knight's 4-attack threatening ability, which says that it has to be blocked. And I still got damage to Pheonixborn face that way. All right, the last card, the last ally. So only 6 allies in the whole deck. And this is an ally that isn't really impactful to the battlefield, but allows me to gain depth of allies in my pool as games go on. So if my opponent's removing my Hammer Knight or removing my Grave Knight, essentially Shepherd of Lost Souls as a 2x copy creates, 3rd or 4th Hammer Knight, or 3rd or 4th Grave Knight, or 3rd Hammer Knight and 3rd Grave Knight. You get the point. It gives me the opportunity cost. It makes my Grave Knights a little more expensive, but I do leave behind a 1/1 body. And what I mean by it makes the Grave Knights more expensive or the Hammer Knights more expensive is I had to pay a dice to get those back. I was going to do that anyways if I have to use a ceremonial power, but I pay a life for that. And sometimes that's okay. Sometimes that's an okay play to pay ceremonial, bring back a knight, suffer your point of life, and go, versus the Shepherd. But if your battlefield is fairly open still, Shepherd gives you a really distinct opportunity to create a 1/1 body as well. Interesting thing about Shepherd is the 1/1 body can be used in conjunction with Odette's Enter the Fray in 2 separate turns, of course, and now ultimately 3, including the Shepherd's play, to attack into a unit, and then you have access to Odette's Enter the Fray, so you can kill a 3-life unit with it. 9 times out of 10, your opponent does not want to take the Shepherd attack, or they don't want to counter into the Shepherd, because that would open up my battlefield again. And this is a 1/1 unit, right? So, like, as I mentioned earlier, Odette's liability at 5 battlefield is 1/1 units aren't impactful enough to the game to give you that space. Well, Shepherd says, okay, well, I'm going to get advantage out of my 1/1 units, and my opponent's either going to lose a unit. I'm going to do it in a specific order to make sure the Shepherd is getting the kill, where I can force a PB block. Or if they don't want to block with the PB, then they don't want to just trade for 0, right? They don't want to just let their unit die and my Shepherd live. So then they 9 times out of 10 counter the Shepherd anyways and it dies. So, and that's exactly what we want. Now we can still recur Shepherd, right? Like we still have Ceremonial access to get Shepherds back if we need to, if the game continues to go long. I have yet to do that in the whole tournament, but just know that that's an option for you. Let's move over to our ready spells, because this is kind of the backbone of the deck and sets up most of what you're going to do in a given round. Okay. So I told you I'd get back to the Charm die. The reason for a 1 of Charm is for the Summon Gilder. Now, that, like, really? Gilder that good to splash a single Charm? And the answer is absolutely yes. Gilder is an incredible O2 unit guard that doesn't deal with Frostback Bear and other terrifying units very well, but everything else in the game it loves, right? There are some exceptions to that rule, like Sonic Swordsman. I don't want to block something with Gilder into Sonic Swordsman because I'm going to get something else exhausted on my board, but sometimes you just have to, and sometimes that's just okay, right? It's just okay to trade your 1 dice Gilder to block 3 damage from a Swordsman or 3 damage from whatever knight is out there. Put it in front of the Grave Knight, not take the 4 damage, take 1. You lose a Gilder. You're getting really favorable with dice exchange because you're not, and card exchange, because once you have a ready spell in play, basically I don't count them as cards any longer when I start summoning them. So the first turn you play it, this is kind of worth about a half a card, like a card and a half. Second turn it's down to just a card. Third turn it's down to like half card, and usually the game's over by then. So ready spells just give us a lot of advantage. Gilder's a very cheap summon with 1 dice cost, other than the book tax to bring it in, which is what the Charm die for. There are times when you can use that Charm die if it rolls power in later rounds to knock down the power of an opponent's unit. There's some value to that. It actually synergizes nicely with Enter the Fray for that. So you can... I've yet to use this in tournament, but there are circumstances where I could Charm power into Enter the Fray and take less damage on Odette and still like do the things I want to do with Enter the Fray. All right. Next thing is the Frostback Bear. You have it? Okay, so I'm going to bring the Gilder out too. Sorry. I should have done this, but there's the Gilder Conjuration. Just again, O2, Unit Guard, Inheritance. We're not using the Inheritance triggers in this deck, but you can certainly use them if you want. Okay. So we talked about that. So let's go to the Frostback Bear. If you don't know what Frostback Bear does at this point, you're probably still pretty new to Ashes, but this is probably one of single-handedly the most played conjurations in the game. It has got a nature power cost to the book, so the book taxes a single nature power, which is kind of expensive. A lot of times I have to meditate into that. And it summons for a nature class and a basic, a 2/3 bear with Terrifying 1. Terrifying 1 just says that this unit cannot be blocked or guarded against by units with an attack value of 1 or less. So if they're playing weenies, the bear just moves past them, right? So the bear just says, I don't care about your weenies, I'm going to smack the Phoenixborn's face, 2 damage. And you can do that repeatedly over and over and over again. You get a couple of on board, and the damage multiplies very quickly, and Phoenixborn start to die very fast. And that is exactly what it is. Other nice part about Bear is in this deck, we don't have to focus on the small units my opponent plays. If it has 1 attack or less, you can pretty much forget about it, right? Like you will race them better, always. But again, this is a control deck, so if the opportunity presents itself to remove your opponent's battlefield presence, you're just winning even more. And that's kind of the ultimate plan. All right. The last card is a favorite of mine, and I'm sure it's a favorite of many others, but I do run a 3 of Frostbite. Now, remember how I said early on in this video that this deck can pivot, and the pivot is to burn. And so what that means is we can get into certain board states, certain dice combinations, certain matchups where we just don't have a chance to attack with units to victory, right? Like our opponent puts out Essence Druid, or they put out Beast Tamer, or something like that. And until we can remove it, we're kind of in a stalled state, but we don't want to take the whole round off, right? Like taking a round off is bad. So Frostbite as a card enables us for a single time blast die to do a point of damage on the board, or to the Phoenixborn directly. So if there's not a good opportunity target for Frostbite, that's great. You know, you can just go to Phoenixborn face. The benefit of Frostbite is also that it buys you main actions. There are many decks out there that are going to be more action efficient round over round, meaning they're going to have a billion actions to take. So they may take 8, 9, 10 turns in a round. This deck may not have 8, 9, 10 turns, depending on what it is. It may be 5 or 6. But Frostbite just is kind of like saying, I'm going to do this one thing, and I'm going to send it back to you, see what you do. And I'm going to do it again and send it back and see what you do. So as you set up more and more Frostbites, you just buy more and more action economy in your turns. So you build an action engine that gives you opportunity to sort of, I like to call it punt a lot. Like, I'm just going to punt to you. Like, I'm going to do this 1 point of damage and I'm going to punt. But I'm not passing. And by not passing, it doesn't give my opponent, it doesn't put the control in my opponent's hands to decide when we're ending the round, which is kind of important. Real fast, and then I'm going to clear these out so we have a little bit more room to discuss the actions, because there are a ton of actions. We are playing a 2 of Massive Growth Alteration. Lots of controversy within my testing group regarding Massive Growth and its value. This is a tricky card. It looks like it's really obvious on paper. It's less obvious than that. But it did single-handedly allow me to take care of an explosive growth snake and win the game. So, is it got value in the deck? Absolutely. Is it a great card in the deck? No, it's okay. And that's a really controversial take for some people. But you get a +4/+4. Spell Guard just means your opponent can't remove the Massive Growth from your unit, so they can't dispel it, they can't do anything like that. And then the Massive Growth, it dies at the end. It's a great target for Frostback Bear, to be honest. You can Massive Growth your Gilder in certain situations. Like if your opponent hasn't opened up the battlefield, you manage to bait out an early block, making a 4/5 Gilder to kill like their knight or something is plenty fine. I mean, that's plenty fine. That's just turns Gilder into a removal. That's something your opponent didn't see coming. They don't want to spend dice removing Gilders. It's a good play. I've yet to do it in this tournament, but it's certainly an out if a game state self presents itself that way. And the last card is a last alteration, not the last card. The last alteration is a Root Armor. Now, this is a first 5 decision card, and we'll talk first 5s a little bit more, but just know this, Root Armor is not always good. You do not want to play Root Armor into somebody that's got a good way to turn Fester on, right? So if you're up against Aerodel and they've got Water Blast and Fester, don't play Root Armor. You're just asking yourself to get blown out because you're going to spend 2 cards, 4 dice. They're going to spend 1 card and 3 dice and 2 dice, and they're going to blow you out, right? Like that's just what it's going to be. Now, there are other situations where they have to spend dice and then attack into your unit. So if they're making 2 attacks, you have to recognize those things. So if you think you're up against Fester in particular, or another Odette with Sword of Virtue, Root Armor is probably not a great decision, but you can also sort of pressure that way. It's a difficult decision to make, but ultimately you have to make a read on what your opponent's attempting to do, and then from there decide whether or not Root Armor is a good first 5. But it's here for that. If you see no Ceremony on the other side, you can pretty much go Root Armor ad nauseum because it's going to shut off Scald kills. It's going to shut off Shared Sorrow kills. I mean, anything that's going to deal damage to kill. It's not going to shut off 2 Shadows or Fadeaways. Those are problems for you, but I will talk about some ways you can get around Fadeaway in just a minute. The Action Suite. And this is where the bulk of the deck is. 16 cards. 16 cards in the Action Suite. So this is, again, a control deck at core. Because of the 5 battlefield, we need to be playing cards from hand that have meaning. So we are just going to use these cards to our biggest advantage that we possibly can. And no doubt about it, Odette's Sword of Virtue is a 3 of. Sword of Virtue is single-handedly one of the most flexible cards in the game, in my opinion. Because for 2 basics, it's a kill your unit. Or kill your opponent's unit, excuse me. You can kill your own too, but I wouldn't recommend that. And not in this deck. Maybe there is some deck where you can do that. But you can kill an opponent's unit, or, and this is the key part here, or in some matchups, kill spells are bad, right? Like some matchups, there's a bunch of 1/1s out there, 2/1s out there. They cost 1 or 2 dice. You don't want to spend the 2 dice and a card to remove those units. You want to remove them in some more efficient way, and i.e. Hammer Knight or something of that nature. And Sword of Virtue would normally be dead if it was just a kill, but because it also has this other ability to remove all wound tokens and exhaustion tokens from a target unit, we can refresh the single best unit on our battlefield with a Sword of Virtue for 2 basics. I mean, you can't beat Sword of Virtue here, guys. Like, guys and gals, this card is just pure value all day, and it's one of the big reasons between Enter the Fray and Sword of Virtue. I think Odette is single-handedly one of the best Pheonixborns. Okay. Now, remember how I said I was done with Conjurations and Allies? I lied. I have 2 more cards in the deck that these are first 5 restricted, and they're chained in competitive play, which means that you cannot first 5 it, and you cannot play it round 1. There's a big combo on that. We have a video on our YouTube channel. It's a few months old. You can go back and look for it if you're really interested in understanding why this is bad for the game or not healthy for the game. But Summon Shining Hydra is a divine class, nature class, and a basic, which are fairly easy to roll, which means that you don't have to necessarily meditate into this card very often. And it just says place a Shining Hydra conjuration on the battlefield. That conjuration has 1 attack, 4 life. So as a whole, this is not like a super powerful unit on the front end. It does have a side action that doesn't require exhausting, which says remove 1 wound token from this unit to attach a Shining Hydra head conjuration alteration unit. If we put a Shining Hydra head on, it now gains Terrifying 1. Just means 1 or less, so it gives the Frostback bear ability. It becomes a 2/4. So 1 head essentially makes this a more expensive Frostback bear. I mean, whatever. That's fine. I mean, it's a threatening enough unit that your opponent's going to spend time and resources trying to remove it. Because if you get second head, it's now a 3/4, but it has Terrifying 2. So the Terrifying stack. And so Terrifying 2 now means that units with 2 or less can't. That narrows down the number of units that can block this substantially in Ashes. I mean, it gets down to, I think, under 10 units that can block this. Interesting note is if you could do this all in the same turn and massive growth it, you actually get to a point where if it's just 2 and massive growth, it's 6 attack that's basically unblockable. Right? Basically. Not completely at this stage. It's not completely at any stage, but it's even narrower if you can put the 3rd head on. 3rd head gives it Terrifying 3. 3 or less units can't block it. Takes all the knights out of the picture. Only Grave Knight, Iron Rhino can block this guy. What? I mean, like, seriously, that's it. Those are the only Flash Archer. I think Flash Archer is a 4/2. So if you play a Flash Archer, but if your opponent plays Flash Archer into Shining Hydra, I would gladly take 4 with Odette's Enter the Fray ability to kill that Flash Archer and just swing for the fences. And if you set this up, this turns into, and I quoted this wrong, I'm sorry, this would have been 7 attack with 2 heads. It turns into 8 attack with 3 heads, with a massive growth. 8 attack that can only be blocked by 2 units in the whole game. What? Okay, so this can be a finisher. Although it takes a ton of tempo, you're pretty much all bought into it, and I would not recommend it. It's not actually what the deck is set up for. It just can do it, right? Like, that's the ceiling. If the game state presents itself in a way that makes sense to do, then go for it. But I have only found one occasion where it might have made sense, and I ended up not doing it. So, because it takes a long time, many decks in competitive play just can beat you before you'll get it set up. So I would recommend just using Hydra for what it is at value. And that's a 1/4. If you can make a single head on it, it's a 2/4. And we have some enablers to help make the heads. Okay. Speaking of enablers to help make the heads, we're playing 3x Nature's Wrath. So one of the things that can get you in trouble against certain opponents, and I'm particularly thinking of like Time Hoppers and Fallen here, is that because we only have 5 battlefield and not all of our units are alert, we only have 2 alert units in the whole deck, it's very easy for our opponent to out-wide us. And then after they've got more units on the field, they can deal 3 or 4 points damage and we can never attack. So we now are on this race with their Fallen where we have to do 3 or 4 damage a turn, and we have to do that, or a round, and we have to do that through our burn suite, mainly up to this point Frostbite. However, Nature's Wrath sort of gives us a tempo swing where we can clear their board, and depending on the situation, it's going to take them some turns to set back up, and that gives us potentially an opportunity to race and win the game. It also does 1 point of damage to the Hydra, which means that we can regenerate the Hydra and make it terrifying 1, and deal 2 damage with the Hydra, 2 damage with the bear, 2 damage with another bear. You're now dealing 6. Even if they go full fallen and they're dealing 7, now the race is down by a single point. And assuming we still have a Hammer Knight or something in play, you're probably only taking 5 or 6 a turn, which is still a lot, but we're able to effectively race the fallen with this plan. And so that's why I built this way. Just to give me another terrifying 1 unit and have some enablers for it. One of the things that I found in a lot of testing games was that when you play just a swing deck with no pivot to burn or some other pivot, whether that's mill or whatever it may be, that you can lack the reach to win a game, right? You can get an opponent down to 2, 3, 1, but you just don't have a way to finish, right? Like, it takes your entire exhaustion, and so the only way you would finish is to move into the next round. And sometimes you just don't move into the next round. Sometimes your opponent can beat you there. And so for me, I wanted to include 3x Molten Gold copies. Again, we got access to 5 nature dice. This just gives me reach and shortens and reduces the Pheonixborn's health pool. However, the thing to note about Molten Gold that's important here is that Molten Gold is place 3 wound tokens on target unit or Pheonixborn. What's important about that is that Molten Gold can be a removal tool for you. You can Gilder ping a 4-life knight. Very rarely are they going to do anything with it. They might think that you're going to fester them, potentially, because we do threaten fester if we have the dice showing that way. But you can just Molten Gold. And so I use Molten Gold a lot, especially in the early parts of the game, as a removal tool. Less about like giving me the reach that I thought, because the bottom line is, if you clear the units out, you get the reach off your units then. So it just works as another removal tool. So I've got Sword of Virtue as a 3x, Molten Gold as a 3x, Enter the Fray as a number of rounds, X, right? So if you play 4 rounds, it's 4 times you get to use that, unless you get choked or something. And so I just love Molten Gold as a package, and it just gives you a lot of decision point flexibility on how you're going to win a game. So that's why we got 3x Molten Golds there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, because of the ceremonial dice, I do play 3x Fester. This card is insane with Enter the Fray. Now, you might be saying, wait a minute, Jesse. Why does Enter the Fray matter with Fester? Like, that's slow and it's kind of clunky, and that's true. But a lot of times, your opponent root armors a knight. They play Hammer Knight, root armor, right? 4 dice. And they go, okay, there's 4 dice. And now I've got this 3/5 that you have to deal 6 to kill it in 1 shot, which is basically almost impossible unless you're going to like massive growth of bear. Or you have to, which you can't, first five of massive growth. Or you have to like just let it like beat you up, right? You can sword it. Sword of Virtue is a great card as an answer to those as well. But sometimes you just want another out, right? You want another answer and another way to turn on Fester. And I have in this deck a variety of ways to turn on Fester. And so just mentioning the Grave Knight, right? If somebody plays Grave Knight or plays their knight into, and root armors it and then throws, I throw a Grave Knight with root armor if I'm thinking that's the line of play that's correct. I can attack with my Grave Knight. It will survive. I will put 3 damage on a knight, which is not enough to kill it, but it'll turn on Fester. And then I don't take any damage like Odette damage. But if I don't want to make that play, I can also Odette Enter the Fray, take the 3 damage, and then play Fester at that point. I can also Molten Gold and Fester. I mean, like, there are a number of things here that work out really well. The most powerful one being Enter the Fray and Fester, because Enter the Fray is free, and Fester costs 1, so we're paying 1 dice and a card to remove our opponent's 4 dice and 2 cards. I mean, that's the best you can ask for. I mean, alterations open up 2-for-1s. This is the best way to get a 2-for-1. All right. Obviously, Sword of Virtue can do it for 2 dice, so it's a little less efficient on the dice, 1 card, but it doesn't cost you any health. So that's something to keep in mind. The last 2 cards are also removal cards. See a theme going on here? With Close Combat. Nature Power dice. says choose an unexhausted unit you control, deal damage to another target unit equal to the chosen unit's attack value, then place 1 wound token or 1 exhaustion token on the chosen unit. This is very powerful. However, this is a card. It's tricky to play, and it can cost you tempo, and it can open up your own, like your opponent's own counterfester. So you got to be careful on which unit you're using it on. I like it on, like, if I got a bear with 2 damage on it already or something, I like killing my own bear to open up the battle space and using it to remove another unit if possible. But that's really niche. Like, it's hard to do that, right? And so 9 times out of 10, close combat's going to be used on your Hammer Knight or used on your Grave Knight. And because this places a wound, you can't use Root Armor to prevent the damage. A double knight, triple knight open is a problem because we're not going to be able to play big units into our opponent's triple knight or double knight open. So what do we do in those scenarios? Well, to me, I'm always first fiving the Frostback Bear and the Gilder. Those are going to always be in your first 5. I don't think you're going to go without those. Now, when you look at just dice costs, it's 3 for Frostback Bear, 2 for the Gilder. So this is half of our first 5 in 2 cards. So the last 3 cards have to be affordable. And so if you expect a triple knight, like if you think you're up against like an Echo double knight or an Echo triple knight, like where somebody's going to play, you know, Sonic Swordsman, Master Vampire, and Hammer Knight. Really common, first, the Holy Trinity, if I think they call that a lot of times, or Grave Knight. Any of those 3 knights, how are you going to effectively deal with that? If I suspect a triple knight open, I go Fester, Sword of Virtue. And so this is 5, and another 3 makes 8. We have 2 dice remaining. The 2 dice here is a little funky because there's not really a good, like when we look at nature, we've already spent 1, 2 natures, 3 natures, so we only have 2 natures left. So you could first 5 a Molten Gold here. That's a choice. That gives you a little bit of pressure to the Pheonixborn face because if your opponent goes Grave Knight and you go great, like you can't enter the fray the Grave Knight, and you can summon Gilder, ping the Grave Knight, enter the fray, kill the Grave Knight. You do take 4. I mean, you're still going to take the 4 here, but you keep a Gilder in play. 1 knight's down, and you're good to go. The second knight comes out, and you can sword the second knight. Or if you think it's Grave Knight, you can also just Molten Gold the Grave Knight, save your Enter the Fray and the Gilder. And then when the next knight comes down, if they don't Root Armor it, you can Gilder and then Fester on the round after that. And then if they play third knight, you can sword. If they don't play third knight, now you've got the sword open for your ability to play Frostback Bear. If they played a double knight open, where they've spent 6 cards, or 2 cards and 6 dice, they've only got 4 dice remaining. There's very little out there they can do. They can play their own bear, of course. And you can play your Frostback Bear, and then you can do the Enter the Fray trick, and you know what I was talking about, where you fray their bear, you take 2 damage, they'll attack, you block with your bear, you kill their bear, and then you go ahead and sword your bear to get 2 damage in. And so now you've killed everything on their battlefield, and you're left with a completely wide open, full health bear and a Gilder in play going into round 2. So that's like a good triple knight open. If you're suspecting not as many knights, but you're suspecting a Root Armored knight, the easiest way to deal with Root Armored knight, like I said, from an opportunity cost perspective, is just Sword of Virtue. I like that trade all the time. And so then that leaves open, so you got 7 cards spent. That leaves open 7 dice spent. It leaves open the ability for us to put another unit on the battlefield in R1. And that unit is most likely going to be 9 times out of 10, I'm going to play a Hammer Knight. But again, if I'm up against Maone Snake, I'll make that a Grave Knight instead. Or if I suspect that my opponent's going to play another Knight, like if they're still going to go on double Knight open, like we can play Grave Knight into their Knight and kill their Knight. And I like that value a lot. Like it's a good trade. I get a point of damage in. My Knight is not lost to me forever. So I mean, we've got a lot of tools there, so we can just kind of trade for evens. And then if we do that, we have spent all 10 dice. So the only thing we really have left is to play a Frostbite for setup as that 5th card. So, you know, that's a really common play for me is Frostbite here. If you don't suspect root armor, or they're not playing natural, which, I mean, competitive has a ton of natural. Then I swap the Sword of Virtue out for Fester, and now I have natural ping and Fester open to me, which gives me natural ping for Fester, enter the fray, Brave Knight, or if we think they're going to have a bunch of little guys, like if you think Salamander Monks have sympathies there, I'll play Hammer Knight into Sympathy because it eats up Salamander Monks. And the Hammer Knight just is a great removal for that. And again, this opens up Frostbite Ping or Natural Ping as a way to turn on the Fester. So, and one of the interesting things that you can still do if they root armor is Odette can still turn on Fester with that as well. So you don't have to spend the natural dice for that. You can spend natural dice for Frostbite and a Natural Ping, which gives you sort of lesser removal in a way, but it still works out really well. So I think you have a lot of different flexible options in round one, depending on what your opponent presents and manages. Those are some really common first fives. Against Burn, in particular Brennan Burn, things are a little bit more problematic. Now, Brennan Burn doesn't do a great job of dealing with opponents' battlefields, or Nameen Burn for that matter. So Nameen Burn and Brennan Burn both kind of ignore opponent battlefield for the purposes of just doing Phoenixborn damage and going as fast as they can. And they usually try to open, Brennan Burn in particular will try to open for 6 or 7 damage on turn 2. And that's really common. That makes Bear and Gilder slow against that kind of field. And so it creates some problems for you. So I usually go, and this is really subjective, and this is the matchup I lost. So just bear in mind, this is in theory still. I haven't put this into actual practice. But if you don't think there's going to be a Fester involved, and even if there's going to be a Fester involved, they have to attack with a 2 attack unit, turn on Fester. Just don't block the 2 attack unit. Just take the 2, right? That's the unit you want to not worry about. What's most likely going to happen is they're going to play Risen Horde, right? And then on the next turn, they're going to sack the Risen Horde with Spirit Burn to do 2 damage to you. Make 2 Fallen and respond with Sleeping Widows. They're going to attack with 2 2/1s and a 1/1. And your Hammer Knight, if you go ahead and just go like Hammer Knight, you're going to be able to block one of the 1/1 Fallen. You'll still take 1 because the root armor doesn't matter. Or you can block the 2/1 and take 1 if you don't think Fester is in play. Or don't play the root armor at all and just say, okay, well, I'm going to block a 2/1, force them to Fester your guy, and you'll take 4 more damage, take 6 for round 1. That's a lot. But remember, that's kind of it for Brennan in round 1, right? There's not a ton more that they can do. They might have a Sympathy Pain. They might have some things to do a little bit more burn damage to you, but end of the day, your Hammer Knight's going to live unless they Fester it. You're going to summon a Gilder, and you're going to ping away a Widow. You're going to make a Frostback Bear. You're going to be able to natural ping one of the Widows away. And so I would usually just go Frostbite. Fester's kind of dead, and I would go Sword. Now, I may hold the Sword. I may not actually play Sword round 1, but if they do hit the Hammer Knight, and they don't have the Fester, Sword of Virtue can bring back a Hammer Knight fully healed. So you can get double attack out of Hammer Knight. So you attack into one of their 1/1s. They go, great, I'm not going to block that. You go, great, I'm going to Aftershock kill this other thing, or they're going to PB guard it and take 3. You recover. Now you've got a Aftershock available to clear their field, and you're going to end round 1 with Hammer Knight, Gilder, and Frostback Bear. It's going to be hard for them to move damage through that way, and Hammer Knight's going to continue to punish them. And I like this better than I like playing Root Armor, but Root Armor is not a bad play here either. Okay. Nameen Burn. Play 2 Nameen Burn decks. And again, they sort of just don't interact with your battlefield. They kind of just want to race you in damage, and they're going to do that. And both decks I played were very different, but again, a lot of times it's Frostback Bear. So again, set up those favorable Frostback Bear trades. Play your Hammer Knights or Grave Knights. Use them to advantage. Make them use Molten Golds and Festers and things like that on your units, but make sure you get your advantage out of those instead of theirs. I played, I'm going to be playing Ben Red King with Shatter Pulse. And to me, Shatter Pulse is a situation where I have to make Shatter Pulse be less advantageous for bit. And so the way I do that is making sure that I use my Knight to value. And so I think I still start a Knight in that scenario because, if I play it right, then he may not have a good Shatter Pulse. Like if I can keep his units off the field through Sword of Virtue, that's Enter the Fray, and Gilder Ping, like I might be in a position where he can't Shatter Pulse, right? At least not Shatter Pulse my Knight. And then use the Knight to advantage round over round until he can Shatter Pulse. But I'm getting value out of that Knight before the Shatter Pulse. All right. So, yeah, I think this covers a big variety of different ways to play this deck. I talked a lot about competitive interaction with it. Obviously, the deck list is below in the description, so be sure to check out the list. Play with it yourself. Give it a shot. Run with it a few times. Kind of keep these things I'm talking about in the back of your head. And then come back. Comment on the video. Let me know what you think. Do you think this deck needs something that I missed? One of the things that I have considered is pulling the Massive Gross out of the list for 2 Golden Veils and potentially going to 3rd Golden Veil. But I would have to drop one of the close combats, and then I would only be able to play a single Blood Chains, and I'm not sure that's the way I want to go. But having 3 Golden Veil for that Charm dice seems pretty good when I have a small battlefield, and that protects me from a lot of those things that we were talking about as being problematic. But it does require some proactive meditation because you're going to be very unlikely to roll power die on a single die. And it's susceptible to illusion. If somebody plays illusion, you're not going to be able to play your Golden Veil. So just some things to keep in mind. But I think this is going to wrap up this deck tech. This has been my Odette control list from ShuffleBus Season 3. If you like this, guys and gals, hit the thumbs up. It just tells me that we're doing a good job. Or, if you really love our content, nothing says that more than to hit that subscribe button. You don't have to. We're cool either way. But we love putting out Ashes content, and that thumbs up is really sort of our litmus test, if you will, for whether or not this is the kind of content you want to see. So it's been a while since I did a deck tech. It's been fun to do this one. We will see you all in the future with more Ashes tournament coverage, more deck techs, more of everything. So just stay tuned to the channel, keep plugged in, and we will see you all soon. Take care.